Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ninth graders. Today, since it is our first class of the week, I want to start with the quote of the week, which has to do with bullying. Let me share with you my screen. You will see the quote that I have chosen for this. So the quote says, "No one has ever made himself great by showing how small someone else is." This quote is by Irvin Hum. Why did I choose this particular quote? Because I think that it gives a great message in terms of bullying. Sometimes we have difficult times setting boundaries with the people around us, and that has to do also with respect. I know we one of the values of the previous weeks was respect, and boundaries are very, very important so people don't disrespect us in any area of our lives, right? And why does this quote has to do with bullying? Because sometimes people believe that to make themselves powerful, they have to humiliate or disrespect someone else, and to show the people around them how unworthy other people are of success. And for us, sometimes we have the misconception that for someone to be successful, they have to be rude and really mean. And that's not the case, right? Just because most people who consider themselves successful, they disrespect people, they humiliate them, they step all over other people, doesn't mean that they have the key to success or they are the most successful. Because once people realize how bad they are mistreating other people, they probably are going to start losing the respect of the people around them, right? And that's something that you have to keep in mind. Just because someone is mean, someone is rude, and somebody treats the people around them like they are not worthy of their time of being around them, doesn't mean that they are powerful or that they are better than everyone else. So keep that in mind. People who are truly successful, who are really smart, intelligent, and who have most of the answers on life, they don't disrespect other people, or they don't need to humiliate anybody, because they shine on their own, right? People can see how good they are without comparing them to other people, because they are so unique and so different that the other people around them just are mesmerized by their success. So I wanted to leave this quote with you. Now I'm going to begin with the grammar part of this particular class, grammar and vocabulary of this class. For this week, we are going to be talking about future tense. We are going to be focusing on one of the two structures of future tense. We know that in future we have two structures, going to and will. We are going to be focusing on will and want, the positive and the negative form of that particular structure. But today I want to focus on giving you the main structures of future tense. I'm going to explain both of them so you have a clear idea of what I'm talking about, and then focusing on the one that we need to learn. I'm going to share with you the structures in just a second. So here it is. As I said, I'm going to explain all of the structures, both of the structures, but then I'm going to focus on the one that we need to learn, which is will and want. So the future tense, we have that we use simple future for many things. One of them is to predict a future event or a future situation. For example, I think that the white robot will win the race. Two, we use it also for making decisions at a time that we are speaking. And for that, we have the example, what time do you want to meet tomorrow morning? I'll meet you at 10. So we have two uses for future tense. Later on, you will see the other uses, but we can predict future situations, or we can make decisions when we are speaking about the future. Now, there are adverbs and words that we use to talk about future tense, just as you have in past. This gave us a hint of, or this gives us a clue of where we are in terms of context. And these adverbs are tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the next Sunday, in a few days, in the future, in 2 weeks' time, 2 days later. Those are the most of the times the adverbs that we use with future tense. Of course, there's more, but here are a few examples on which adverbs in the future you can use, right? You can have also in 10 years, in 20 years, in a few weeks. So whenever you're talking about future, most of the time you're going to have these adverbs because, as I said, they give you clue and context of what tense we're talking about. Then we have the positive and negative statements of simple future tense. We have how to use will and will not. In this case, you have want, which is the contraction of will not. But you use this auxiliary verb, will and will not, or in its defect, the contraction one, with all of the pronouns. You can use it with I, with you, with they, with he, with she, it, with all of them. It doesn't change for any of the pronouns because in this case, we don't make a difference between a third person singular or the rest of the pronouns. It remains the same for all of them. Now, after you use the subject or the pronoun, you're going to have the verb will, or if you're talking about something negative, will not, or the contraction want. And the verb is going to be in the base form. The verb is not going to take any form but the base one. You're going to have, in this case, you have the example with be and go. And you can have I will be home in a few days. You will be on holiday Sunday. They will be at home tomorrow. So in all of the sentences, you can see that the structure remains the same. The verb does not change, even though you are using, for example, third person singular. It will always be will and the base form of the verb. If you want to use the negative form, in this case, want, which is the contraction of will not, then you just use the negative form and the verb remains in the base form. And for example, you can say she won't go to school tomorrow or he won't go to school tomorrow. You can also use any other pronoun like you won't go to school tomorrow, or you can substitute the pronouns for a name. You can say Maria, Rene, Anna won't go to school tomorrow, and the structure won't change at all. It will remain the same, right? This is important for you to remember the structure. You have the subject, the auxiliary verb. In this case, it will be will or want. The main verb, it has to be in the base form, and then you have the rest of the sentence, the complement, right? Now, when you want to form a question, most of the times you're going to use the verb to be and the other structure for future tense, which is going to. You have, am I going to buy a computer? Are you going to buy a computer? Or is he going to buy a computer? Now, notice that in this case, since we are using the verb to be, we are dividing, or we do have the distinction between the pronouns, right? The verb to be, you know that with I, you use am, with we, you, they, you use are, and with he, she, it, you use is. But this is particularly in the case of using going to. When you use going to, then you're going to use the verb to be, and you have to make the distinction between a third person singular and the rest of the pronouns. And in this case, when you're using going to, the verb, it's also going to be in the base form. If you notice, you have going to buy or going to install. So in this case, you have a question and it starts with the auxiliary verb, which in this case is the verb to be. We move on to the next. We can also use be going to in the future tense to express a greater degree of certainty. At the beginning of this grammar explanation, I said that in future tense we have two structures. We have will and we have going to. So will, remember that we use it to make predictions or to make decisions when we're speaking. And then we have going to, we use it to express a greater degree or certainty. In this case, you have a better idea of what you're going to be doing in the future. For example, you have talk about what we think will happen soon. For example, look at those black clouds, it's going to rain. There's a greater degree or certainty here because you can see the storm forming, right? There's a greater chance that rain will happen because you're witnessing with your own eyes what is going to happen. Then the other use that we have for going to is when we want to talk about something that you have already decided, it has already been arranged. And the example is, I'm going to punish Mary because she is so talkative. So there's a decision already made. So that's why we're using going to. When there's a greater degree of certainty, when we already know what's going to happen. For example, let's say that you already know which university you're going to, then of course you're going to use going to. I'm going to go to this particular university because you are 100% sure that that's the place that you're going to. Or for example, travel plans. You already have the ticket, you already have the hotel book, and it's going to happen in a week, then you're going to use going to. But when you're not certain of something, that's when you switch and use will. Then we have the negative and the positive forms of going to. In this case, you can see it in the chart. Remember that because with going to, we use the verb to be, then there has to be a distinction between the third person singular, which is he, she, and it, and also the first person, which is I, that for them we use am and is. So we have I am or I am not, positive and negative. Going to visit the girl tomorrow. You, we, they are or aren't going to visit the girl tomorrow. And he, she, and it is or isn't going to visit the girl tomorrow. So if you see the structure, it's almost the same in terms of that you use a subject that you can, or a pronoun, because remember that the pronouns can be substituted by names. You can say Mary, you can say John, you can say Paul, or you can use the pronoun that in this case, that's what is showing in the chart. And then you use the verb to be, going to, and the main verb, which is used in the base form. And then you have the rest of the sentence, right? That the complement. And in this case, we have the adverbs, example, tomorrow, the one that were at the beginning of this presentation, right? That give you a clue or a hint of when this particular situation is going to happen. Now, how do you form questions with be going to? Just to reinforce, remember that we have first the verb to be, depending on which pronoun you are using or which subject you are using. Then you have the verb going to, the main verb remains in the base form, and then you have the rest of the question, which in this case is going to be the complement. You can say, am I going to buy a computer? Are they going to buy a computer? Is he going to buy a computer? Now, to make a comparison of will and be going to, we have this chart. In this case, there has been included will be going, which is another form of future tense, but you have all of the subjects. In this case, they are represented by pronouns. And then you have the auxiliary verb. In this case, we have will and going to. And then the verb, which is with will and with going to, it is on the base form of the verb. If you add the structure will be, then the verb is in ing. But as I said, our main focus is going to be in will and going to. But in here you have, or it is being presented also, the structure will be. So that's important. Now, another structure for future is future continuous. And it's also used to talk about the future, but it's not considered simple future like going to and will. We use the future continuous to talk about activities that will be in progress at a specific time in the future. For example, I will be giving a presentation about computers at 3 this afternoon. The activity, it will be in progress at a specific time. When are you going to start the presentation? At 3. And from there on, you're going to be in that presentation. So that's when you use future continuous. Then another use for future continuous is to talk about arrangements that have been made for the future. For example, the IT club will be having a barbecue next month. So this is an arrangement that has been made previously, and it's going to happen within the next month. So this is also another way to express a future activity or future situation, but in this case using future continuous. If you see, this is the structure that we have on the chart previously. You have the verb in ing, but the auxiliary in this case is be having or be given. In the examples in the sentences, you can see how it's being used, right? In this case, the structure for future continuous is the verb will, then the auxiliary be, and then the main verb is in ing. And here you have it better expressed. For future continuous, you have the auxiliary verb, which is will, and in the negative form, you just have to add not, will not be, or in this case, the contraction also won't be. And the main verb is in ing. For example, you have, you will be going to the show, they will not be having lunch at 1 p.m., and he won't be leaving soon. So you can see how it's different. The present, the future continuous is different from the simple future tense, because with will and going to, the verb remains in the base form. But when you use future continue, the main verb changes and it takes the form of ing. Then how do you form questions in the future continuous? Well, you use the auxiliary verb will, then the subject. In this case, they are represented by pronouns. Then the auxiliary verb be for all of the pronouns, right? This won't change. For example, you are not going to be using will, he is going to, or something like that form. No, for all of the pronouns and for all of the subject, the auxiliary verb will be the same, which is be. For I, for we, for you, for he, for she, it will always be in the future continuous. And then, of course, you don't have to forget that the verb in the future continuous is in the ing form. And then, of course, the complement, which in this case has to do with the question that you're asking. and you're going to have the question form. Then the positive and the negative forms, just to make a difference, to show the difference between all of the tenses. You have in the present tense, the subject, again, represented by pronouns. Then the verb, in this case, it's being used, the verb to be. And the time adverb at the end. And you have in the present form, am, or the negative, which is am not, are, or are not, is or is not, or the contraction in all of them, aren't or isn't. Then in the past, you have were or was, and the negative were not or weren't, or was not or wasn't. And then in the future, you have will be, or in the negative, will not be, or the contraction won't. But in all of them, if you see, you have the distinction on how you're going to use them with all of the tenses and all of the pronouns. And it has been used the same adjective or the same adjective placement. In all of them, you have happy at home, but the time adverb, the time phrase changes for the present, the past, and the future. For the present, you have every day. For past, you have yesterday. And for future, you have tomorrow. And remember that these adverbs, what they do is that they give us a hint or a clue of what we are talking about, which tense we're using. Then the question form in the past, the present and the future, we have it here. Again, just to give you a clear idea on what the difference is for the three tenses. In this case, the verb to be continues to be used. And in the present, you have the three forms of the verb to be, am, are, and is. In the past, you have was and were, and in the future, you have will. You have the subject, again, it is being represented by pronouns, but remember that you can change it by names. It doesn't make any difference. And then the only tense that changes a bit is the future, that you have to add after the subject, you add be. And then the adjective or the complement is the same for all of the questions in this particular case. And then you have the time adverb or the time phrase, which in this case is the same as we use in the previous example. We have every day for present, yesterday for past, and tomorrow for the future, right? So we need to focus, as I said, our main focus is going to be the future. So keep in mind that to ask question in future, you're going to use will, any subject or pronoun. Then you have to include be and then the complement. Now here we have for present, past, and future for any other verb that isn't the verb to be. In this case, you have again the same structure, present, past, and future with the pronouns. Then if you see in the verb, it changes for the present, you have go or goes. If you're using third person singular, then you have in past, you have went. But remember that in past, you have to keep in mind if the verb is a regular or irregular verb. And then in future, which I think is the easiest, you have to use will and the base form of the verb. Right? You use or you say, I will go to school tomorrow, or he will go to school tomorrow, or she will go to school tomorrow. I think that's one of the easiest structures to remember. We have a will in the base form of the verb. Then how do you make questions when you don't have the verb to be? Then you use, in this case, the auxiliary will. In present, you have do or does, depending if you're using a third person singular or not. In past, you have did, but in the future, which is the structure that we are focusing on, we have will. For all of the pronouns, we use will in the base form of the verb. And will you go to school tomorrow? Will they go to school tomorrow? Then the difference between the adverbs of time in each of the tenses, you have for present, examples every day, every week, every Sunday, usually often, sometimes never. In past, you have yesterday, the day before yesterday, last week, a week ago. But in the future, you have phrases or adverbs such as tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, next Monday, next morning, in a few days, in 2 weeks, 2 days later, after a week. So with that, I explained the structure for this week, which is the future tense. Remember that this is a general idea of the future tense. We are going to be focusing on one of the two structures in the future tense. Remember that we have will and going to. We are going to be talking about, or we are going to be using will specifically. So I leave you with this. You can practice the future tense with your workbook on page 6. If you go to your workbook on page 6, you will be able to practice the structure that I explained today. Hopefully in the next class, we are going to be able to check all of the answers for that particular page and exercises. So without any more things to explain, I will leave you. Thank you for watching this class.